The German submarine was sinking. Its stern was already disappearing beneath the Atlantic, seawater was pouring into its compartments, and somewhere inside the vessel, explosive charges might be counting down. Yet 9 American sailors were rowing directly toward it. They had no way of knowing whether German soldiers were still waiting below deck. They did not know how much time remained before the submarine exploded, and they could not even be certain the vessel would stay above water long enough for them to escape. But their orders were not to destroy it, they were going to steal it. As their small boat approached, the abandoned U-boat was still moving in circles. Waves swept across its metal deck, forcing the Americans to search for something they could grab. Lieutenant Albert David climbed aboard first. Behind him came 8 sailors carrying weapons, tools, and equipment prepared for a mission the United States Navy had never attempted during the war. They had to enter the submarine, disarm the explosives, stop the flooding, recover its secret documents, and somehow keep the entire vessel from sinking. One mistake could kill every man on board, but if they succeeded, the Americans would capture something Nazi Germany believed could never fall into enemy hands. Inside the submarine were codebooks, charts, communications equipment, German technology, and the systems used to guide U-boats across the Atlantic. The prize was not merely a vessel, it was a floating collection of military secrets. And Germany could never be allowed to discover that the Americans had taken it. Because if Berlin learned the truth, German commanders could immediately change their codes and procedures, destroying one of the Allies' most valuable intelligence advantages. On June 4, 1944, 2 days before the invasion of Normandy, a group of American sailors climbed into a flooding enemy submarine that could explode at any moment. What followed became one of the most daring captures in United States naval history. This is the secret story of U-505, the Nazi submarine the Americans were supposed to sink but decided to steal instead. For years, German U-boats had turned the Atlantic into a hunting ground. They moved beneath the surface, searched for Allied convoys, and attacked without warning. Merchant ships carrying food, fuel, weapons, aircraft, and soldiers could disappear in minutes. The objective was simple. If Germany could cut the shipping routes between North America and Europe, Britain could be starved, Allied armies could be deprived of supplies, and any future invasion of occupied Europe could become impossible. By 1944, the balance had begun to change. Improved radar, sonar, aircraft patrols, intelligence, and escort vessels made the Atlantic increasingly dangerous for German submarines. American hunter-killer groups were created specifically to search for U-boats far from the convoys. At the center of one of these groups was the escort carrier USS Guadalcanal. It was smaller than the Great Fleet carriers operating in the Pacific, but it carried aircraft capable of searching enormous sections of ocean. Surrounding it were fast destroyer escorts equipped with sonar, depth charges, and hedgehog projectors. Together, they could locate a submarine, surround it, and attack until it was destroyed. But Captain Daniel Gallery, commander of the task group, wanted something more. He did not simply want to sink another U-boat, he wanted to capture one. Every German submarine carried information the Allies desperately wanted. There were charts showing patrol routes and meeting points, maintenance records that revealed the strengths and weaknesses of German machinery, codebooks and communications equipment, acoustic torpedoes, detection systems, and engineering designs that could be studied by American specialists. Most submarines took those secrets to the bottom. German commanders were instructed to destroy sensitive documents and sink their own vessels whenever capture appeared possible. Gallery believed that if an American force moved quickly enough, it might prevent that from happening. But this created an enormous risk. Sinking a submarine was difficult. Capturing one required the Americans to bring it to the surface without completely destroying it, force the crew to abandon ship, and place sailors aboard before the Germans could finish sinking it. The boarding team would then enter an enemy vessel that could be filled with armed sailors, explosives, flooding compartments, and live torpedoes. It sounded less like a naval operation than a trap. Gallery decided to prepare for it anyway. Captain Gallery did not wait for his submarine to appear before deciding what to do. He turned the capture plan into a routine. Boarding parties were organized and trained. Sailors practiced leaving their ships in small boats, approaching a disabled submarine, climbing aboard and entering through narrow hatches. They prepared tools for cutting wires, closing valves, stopping leaks, and securing tow lines. Weapons were included in case German crewmen remained inside. The task group also developed a clear division of responsibility. Some ships would attack the submarine, Others would rescue the German survivors. The boarding party would move toward the U-boat as soon as its crew abandoned it. Every second would matter. The longer the submarine remained empty, the deeper it could sink. Gallery's men had already come close to capturing a German U-boat during an earlier patrol, but the submarine was destroyed before the Americans could take control of it. The failure convinced Gallery that the idea was possible. They simply had to move faster the next time. On May 15, 1944, Task Group 22.3 sailed from Norfolk, Virginia. The group consisted of USS Guadalcanal and 5 destroyer escorts: USS Pillsbury, USS Pope, USS Flaherty, USS Chatelaine, and USS Jenks. Their patrol area lay near the coast of West Africa and the Cape Verde Islands. American intelligence believed German submarines were operating there. Every day, Gallery received information from a submarine tracking room in Washington. Aircraft searched from above. Sonar operators listened below. Lookouts scanned the horizon for periscopes, smoke, or anything else that appeared unnatural. But the Atlantic remained empty. Days passed, then weeks. Fuel began running low. No submarine appeared. Gallery's carefully trained boarding parties waited beside equipment they might never use. Eventually, the captain was forced to make a decision. The task group would abandon the search and head toward Casablanca to refuel. The opportunity appeared to be gone. Then, only minutes after the group began changing course, a sonar operator aboard USS Chatelaine heard something beneath the water. It was faint, it was moving, and it was close. At 11:10 in the morning on June 4th, USS Chatelaine reported a possible submarine contact. The task group immediately changed formation. USS Guadalcanal moved away from the danger. The escort carrier carried aircraft and aviation fuel, making it too valuable and too vulnerable to approach a submerged U-boat armed with torpedoes. The destroyer escorts closed in. Chatelaine maintained sonar contact and prepared to attack. Beneath the surface was U-505, a large Type INC submarine commanded by Harold Lang. The U-boat had been operating near the west coast of Africa and was now attempting to return home. Its crew heard the approaching American ships. Inside the narrow submarine, men moved to their stations as propellers and sonar signals echoed through the water around them. Chatelaine launched a spread of Hedgehog bombs. Unlike ordinary depth charges, Hedgehogs exploded only if they struck the submarine directly. The attack missed. For a moment, U-505 remained hidden. But Chatelaine had not lost the contact. As the destroyer escort turned for another attack, 2 Wildcat fighters from Guadalcanal arrived overhead. The pilots could not see the submarine clearly beneath the water. Instead, they watched for the dark shape moving below the surface and fired their machine guns into the ocean to mark its location for the ships. Chatelaine approached again. This time, the crew released a pattern of shallow-set depth charges. The explosives entered the water behind the ship. Seconds later, the Atlantic erupted. The blasts struck U-505 with enormous pressure. Equipment broke loose. Pipes ruptured. Water entered the submarine. The force threw men against the walls and filled the interior with noise, confusion, and the fear that the pressure hull had been destroyed. Captain Lang believed his submarine was fatally damaged. Remaining underwater could mean dying with the entire crew. He gave the order to surface and abandon ship. The Americans watched as the ocean split open. A dark conning tower rose through the water. U-505 had been forced to the surface. Now the task group had only seconds to decide whether it would become a wreck or a prize. The American ships opened fire as U-505 appeared. Machine gun rounds and cannon fire struck around the conning tower, forcing the German crew away from their weapons. Wildcat fighters passed overhead and fired toward the submarine. The Germans began pouring out of the hatches. Some jumped directly into the Atlantic. Others ran across the deck before diving over the side. Captain Harold Lang was wounded during the action and entered the water with his men. Only one German sailor, Gottfried Fischer, was killed. The remaining 58 crewmen abandoned the submarine and waited in the ocean as American vessels moved to rescue them. But before leaving, the Germans attempted to ensure that U-585 would never be captured. Valves were opened to flood the boat. Scuttling charges were prepared inside. The submarine's rudder was left turned hard to starboard, causing the vessel to move in a wide circle. From the American ships, it appeared that the U-boat was already sinking. Its stern sat dangerously low in the water. The deck tilted. Waves repeatedly swept over the hull. The normal response would have been to continue firing until the submarine disappeared. That would eliminate any possibility that German sailors remained aboard or that the U-boat could launch a final torpedo. But Gallery had spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. The order went out. Capture the submarine. A whaleboat was lowered from USS Pillsbury. Inside it were 9 members of the specially trained boarding party, led by Lieutenant Junior Grade Albert David. The sailors carried rifles and pistols in case they encountered resistance below deck. They also carried tools they hoped could stop the submarine from sinking. As their small boat approached, U-505 continued turning through the water. There was no safe platform waiting for them. They would have to bring the whaleboat beside the moving submarine, grab the slippery metal surface, and climb aboard while the Atlantic swept across the deck. Behind them, American sailors watched from the surrounding ships. In front of them was an enemy submarine filling with water, and no one knew whether the Germans had left behind a crewman or a bomb. Albert David climbed onto U-505 without waiting for proof that the submarine was empty. His men followed. The deck moved beneath their feet as the damaged vessel circled through the waves. The stern was sinking lower. The conning tower hatch stood open. David looked down into the darkness. A submarine was one of the most dangerous places imaginable to enter. Its passages were narrow. Its compartments were crowded with pipes, machinery, electrical cables, torpedoes, and fuel. If an armed German sailor was hiding inside, the Americans would have almost no room to protect themselves. If the scuttling charges exploded, the narrow hull would become a steel coffin, and if the submarine suddenly sank, anyone below deck could be trapped before reaching the hatch. David entered anyway. The first compartments appeared empty. The German crew had escaped. But the absence of resistance did not make the submarine safe. Water was already spreading through the interior. The floor tilted beneath the Americans. Loose equipment moved as U-505 rolled in the sea. Electrical systems had been damaged, leaving sections of the submarine dark. The air smelled of oil, seawater, machinery, and explosives. The men divided their tasks. Some searched for German sailors, others looked for documents. Charts, code books, and papers were collected before the water could destroy them. Communications equipment and cryptographic material were identified for removal. At the same time, the boarders searched for anything designed to send the submarine to the bottom. Wires leading to scuttling charges were pulled or cut. Open valves were closed. Every compartment presented another danger. The German crew had been trained to destroy the boat before abandoning it. The Americans were now trying to reverse that process without knowing exactly what the Germans had done. Then they discovered the main source of the flooding. A large opening connected to the submarine sea strainer had been left unsecured. Ocean water was rushing directly into the boat. Unless someone found a way to close it, U-505 would sink regardless of everything else they saved. Motor machinists made to Xenon Lukashus searched the flooding compartment for the missing cover. Water continued entering the submarine. The stern sank deeper. Above him, additional American sailors were arriving to help, but their weight could not be allowed to turn a dangerous situation into a disaster. Lukashus located the sea strainer cover and forced it back into place. The stream of water stopped. It was a critical victory, but U-505 was still far from safe. Water already inside the submarine had to be controlled. More valves needed to be found and closed. Damaged pipes and openings had to be identified. The scuttling charges still had to be disconnected. The Americans searched through the unfamiliar German machinery using labels they could not always understand. Every wire presented a question. Was it part of the submarine's electrical system, or did it lead to an explosive charge? The boarding party worked quickly, pulling wires from the charges they discovered. Had even one detonated, it could have killed the men inside and broken the submarine open. While some sailors fought the flooding, others began removing the intelligence material. Code books were gathered. Charts were taken from the navigation spaces. Documents, communications records, technical manuals, and German equipment were carried toward the hatch. Among the captured material were cryptographic devices and information connected to the Enigma system used for German naval communications. The Allies had already made major progress against German codes, but the material aboard U-505 could confirm procedures, reveal changes, and provide intelligence far beyond what could be recovered from a submarine resting at the bottom of the Atlantic. The Americans were no longer simply trying to keep a vessel afloat. They were protecting one of the most valuable intelligence collections captured at sea during the war. Above deck, sailors attempted to attach tow lines. The waves made every movement dangerous. Men had to hold tightly to a guide wire as water crossed the submarine's deck. USS Pillsbury attempted to move close enough to assist, but the two vessels collided and damaged the destroyer escort's hull. UF-5 Lowell was still alive, but it appeared determined to take every American working aboard it to the bottom. Motor machinists made to Xenon Lukashus searched the flooding compartment for the missing cover. Water continued entering the submarine. The stern sank deeper. Above him, additional American sailors were arriving to help, but their weight to not be allowed to turn a dangerous situation into a disaster. Lukashus located the sea strainer cover and forced it back into place. The stream of water stopped. It was a critical victory, but U-505 was still far from safe. Water already inside the submarine had to be controlled. More valves needed to be found and closed. Damaged pipes and openings had to be identified. The scuttling charges still had to be disconnected. The Americans searched through the unfamiliar German machinery using labels they could not always understand. Every wire presented a question. Was it part of the submarine's electrical system, or did it lead to an explosive charge? The boarding party worked quickly, pulling wires from the charges they discovered. Had even one detonated, it could have killed the men inside and broken the submarine open. While some sailors fought the flooding, others began removing the intelligence material. Code books were gathered. Charts were taken from the navigation spaces. Documents, communications records, technical manuals, and German equipment were carried toward the hatch. Among the captured material were cryptographic devices and information connected to the Enigma system used for German naval communications. The Allies had already made major progress against German codes, but the material aboard U-505 could confirm procedures, reveal changes, and provide intelligence far beyond what could be recovered from a submarine resting at the bottom of the Atlantic. The Americans were no longer simply trying to keep a vessel afloat. They were protecting one of the most valuable intelligence collections captured at sea during the war. Above deck, sailors attempted to attach tow lines. The waves made every movement dangerous. Men had to hold tightly to a guide wire as water crossed the submarine's deck. USS Pillsbury attempted to move close enough to assist, but the two vessels collided and damaged the destroyer escort's hull. UF-5 Lowell was still alive, but it appeared determined to take every American working aboard it to the bottom. The official story had to be that U-505 had sunk with its entire crew. The American ships maintained strict radio discipline. The submarine was taken to a concealed anchorage in Bermuda, where specialists could study it away from public view. Its captured documents and equipment were removed and examined. The 58 surviving German sailors presented a more difficult problem. Under normal conditions, prisoners of war could inform their families of their capture. The International Red Cross would also be notified. But any letter from one of the U-505 crewmen would tell Germany that the submarine had not gone down with all hands. The prisoners were therefore isolated from other German captives. Their outgoing letters were confiscated. The Red Cross was not told where they were. The secrecy protected Allied intelligence, but it also meant that the treatment of the prisoners did not fully comply with the existing Geneva Convention requirements. The men were eventually transported to Camp Ruston in Louisiana, where they remained separated from other prisoners. By August 1944, the German Navy had concluded that U-505 was lost. The families of its crew were informed that the men should be considered dead. Inside the camp, the prisoners made several attempts to reveal that they were still alive. During one unusual escape attempt, they created small balloons from cellophane bags. Using chemicals, they produced hydrogen gas to lift them into the air. The prisoners attached messages and symbols declaring that U-505 still lived, then released the balloons beyond the camp fences. The messages were never known to have reached Germany. Meanwhile, thousands of Americans connected to the task group and the intelligence operation remained silent. The secret held through the final year of the war. Germany did not learn that the Allies possessed the submarine. There was no emergency change to naval codes caused by the capture. No warning was sent to other U-boats that their equipment and procedures were being examined. The greatest success of the operation was no longer that U-505 had been captured. It was that Nazi Germany believed it had been destroyed. The Americans had stolen an enemy submarine in open water and then hidden it in plain sight for the rest of the war. The capture of U-505 was finally announced publicly in May 1945, after Germany had surrendered. Only then could the sailors involved receive full recognition. Lieutenant Albert David was awarded the Medal of Honor for leading the first boarding party onto a submarine that might sink or explode at any moment. Other members of the boarding and salvage teams received decorations for their actions. Task Group 22.3 had achieved something the United States Navy had not done for more than a century. U-505 became the first enemy warship captured by the United States on the high seas since 1815. But the operation mattered for more than its rarity. The captured code books, charts, technical documents, communications equipment, torpedoes, and engineering systems gave American experts an opportunity that destruction could never provide. They could examine a functioning German U-boat from the inside. They could understand how its crew lived, communicated, navigated, detected enemies, maintained machinery, and survived long patrols beneath the Atlantic. The submarine itself survived the war. After American specialists finished studying it, U-505 was nearly discarded. Instead, it was preserved and eventually transported to Chicago, where it remains as one of the few surviving German U-boats and a memorial to the sailors who fought in the Battle of the Atlantic. Today, visitors can walk beside the same hull Albert David and his men boarded in June 1944. The steel is no longer moving in circles, the compartments are no longer flooding, and no explosive charges are hidden in the darkness. But the danger of that moment remains difficult to comprehend. 9 American sailors approached an enemy submarine that appeared to be sinking. They climbed onto its flooded deck. They entered without knowing who or what was waiting below. They disarmed the charges, stopped the water, recovered its secrets, and kept the entire operation hidden from Germany. They had been trained to destroy U-boats. On that day, they did something far more difficult. They captured one alive. And in the middle of the Atlantic, the hunters became the hunted, while one of Nazi Germany's most guarded weapons became an American prize. For more forgotten stories of courage, impossible missions, and enemies who never saw the Americans coming, subscribe to Forgotten War Stories. If you want more forgotten war stories that sound impossible but really happened, subscribe and follow us.